Sir, this vehicle was reported stolen this morning.
Officer, that's impossible. This is my van. My kids are in the back.
Please, just check the registration again. I've given you a lawful order. Step out of the vehicle, now.
The Saturday air hung thick and warm over Averton County, the kind of late spring heat that promised a long, sweltering summer. For Daniel Reed, it was the perfect day for a project. At 35, he moved with the settled, deliberate economy of a man who worked with his hands, a carpenter by trade. He found a quiet satisfaction in the tangible world of wood, dust, and precision. Today's mission was mundane but necessary, a trip to the hardware store for lumber to finally build the backyard pergola his younger siblings had been dreaming of, his minivan. A 10-year-old silver workhorse with over 150,000 miles on the odometer was less a vehicle and more a member of the family. It had hauled lumber, camping gear, and groceries. It had been the stage for countless arguments and sing-alongs. It was his. "Are you sure you measured the crossbeams right this time?" Chloe asked from the back seat, her voice laced with the playful skepticism only a 20-year-old sister could muster. She was home from college for the weekend, her textbooks temporarily abandoned for the more pressing matter of supervising her older brothers. For the third time, "Yes," Daniel said, his eyes on the road. "Measure twice. Cut once. It's the first rule." Ben, 22 and seated beside Chloe, chimed in. "His first rule is actually, don't talk to me before I've had coffee. But the measuring thing is a close second." Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror, a small smile touching his lips. Since their parents' passing 5 years ago, he had stepped into a role he'd never asked for but wouldn't trade for anything. He was no longer just their brother, he was their anchor, their guardian, the steady center of their small, resilient world. This pergola was more than just a structure of wood and screws. It was another brick in the foundation of the life they were rebuilding together. It was normalcy. He was thinking about wood stains and deck screws when the world dissolved into flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. A patrol car, a sleek black and white sedan from the Averton County Sheriff's Department, was right on his bumper. Daniel's stomach tightened, a familiar knot of anxiety that every man felt when confronted by the sudden, overwhelming authority of a police car. He did a quick mental check. Was he speeding? No. He'd been 5 under the limit. Broken taillight? He'd checked them last week. He signaled, his movements calm and practiced, and pulled the minivan over to the curb on Aspen Street, a quiet, sun-dappled lane lined with neatly kept houses. "What's going on?" Chloe asked. Her voice hushed. "Probably just a random check or something." "Everybody stay calm," Daniel instructed. Though his own heart was beating a little faster than he'd like. He rolled down his window, placing his hands on the top of the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. The ritual was automatic, a learned response from a lifetime of understanding the unwritten rules of such encounters. The sheriff's deputy who approached the driver's side window was young, probably not yet 30, with a military-style haircut and a jaw that looked like it was permanently clenched. His sunglasses were mirrored, making it impossible to see his eyes, and his hand rested lightly on the butt of his holstered firearm. He moved with a rigid, almost swaggering confidence that seemed out of place on the peaceful suburban street. The nameplate on his uniform read, E. Riley. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Deputy Riley said. His voice was flat. A monotone command that brooked no argument. There was no "good afternoon," no "do you know why I pulled you over?" Just the demand. "Of course, officer," Daniel said, his tone even and respectful. He reached slowly and deliberately for the glove compartment, narrating his actions. "Just getting my registration and insurance for you. My wallet is in my back pocket." He handed over the documents, his fingers steady. This was a process, an unpleasant but routine part of life. A misunderstanding that would be cleared up in a matter of minutes. The deputy took the papers, his gaze sweeping over them for a fraction of a second before he turned his attention to the minivan itself. He scanned the dashboard, the back seats where Chloe and Ben sat in watchful silence, his eyes lingering for a moment on the scuffed interior and the faint smell of sawdust. Then he looked back at Daniel, his expression unreadable behind the reflective lenses. He took a step back from the car, speaking into the radio on his shoulder, his voice a low murmur that Daniel couldn't quite decipher. The wait stretched on, the silence in the car broken only by the crackle of the police radio and the hum of the air conditioner. The sun beat down on the roof of the minivan. It felt like an eternity. Daniel just wanted to get his lumber and go home. The seconds ticked by, each one heavier than the last. Ben shifted in the back seat, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. Chloe had her phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over the screen, a silent habit of a generation that documented everything. Daniel kept his hands on the wheel, his posture relaxed, a deliberate projection of non-aggression. He had done nothing wrong. There was nothing to worry about. This was procedure. Deputy Riley finished his radio communication and walked back to the window, the same impassive expression on his face. He leaned down slightly, his head filling the open frame. The mirrored sunglasses reflected a distorted image of Daniel's own concerned face. "Daniel Reed," Riley stated, not as a question, but as a confirmation. "This vehicle was reported stolen this morning." The sentence landed in the quiet minivan with the force of a physical blow. For a moment, Daniel simply stared, certain he had misheard. The words made no sense. It was like the deputy had started speaking a foreign language. "I'm sorry. Officer, what was that?" he asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "You said stolen?" "That's correct," Riley replied, his tone unchanged. "A 2014 silver minivan. License plate matches. Reported stolen at 0800 hours this morning." Daniel felt a laugh bubble up in his throat, a sharp, incredulous sound. He quickly suppressed it. This wasn't funny. This was insane. "Officer, that's impossible," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is my van. I've owned it for 6 years. I bought it from a dealership just outside the city. The title is in my name. The registration you're holding is in my name. I was at home this morning. It was in my driveway." He pointed to the registration slip in the deputy's hand. "The address on there? That's my house. It's about 10 minutes from here. The van has been there all day until we left 30 minutes ago." Riley's expression didn't flicker. He seemed completely unmoved by the logic, by the sheer absurdity of the situation. It was as if Daniel's explanation was just meaningless noise, an annoying delay in a pre-written script. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle," he said. "Hold on." Ben's voice cut in from the back, sharp and angry. "He just told you it's his van. Are you deaf? Look at the papers." "Ben, be quiet," Daniel commanded, not taking his eyes off the deputy. He had to manage this. He had to keep his brother from making things worse. He turned his focus back to Riley. "Officer, with all due respect, there has to be a mistake. Maybe someone with a similar plate? A clerical error in your system? This is my family's car. My siblings are in the back. We're just going to the hardware store." He was pleading for reason, for a moment of common sense to break through the procedural wall the deputy had erected. He was trying to connect with the man behind the uniform. But there was no connection to be made. Riley was an impenetrable fortress of authority. "The information I have says the vehicle is stolen," Riley repeated, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I've given you a lawful order. Step out of the vehicle. Now." The politeness was gone. The thin veneer of professional courtesy had been stripped away, revealing something cold and inflexible beneath. This was no longer a conversation. It was a confrontation. Daniel's mind raced, trying to find a way through the impasse. He had the title for the van in a file at home. He had the bill of sale. He had years of maintenance records. He had a dozen neighbors who saw him leave in that van every single day. He had all the proof in the world, but none of it mattered here, on the side of Aspen Street, under the unblinking gaze of this deputy. "Okay," Daniel said, raising his hands slowly in a gesture of surrender. "Okay. I'm stepping out. Just take it easy. My brother and sister are here. There's no need for this to escalate." He reached for the door handle, his heart hammering against his ribs. This wasn't right. Every instinct in his body screamed that this was a profound and dangerous injustice. He wasn't a car thief. He was a carpenter. He was a brother. He was a man on his way to buy lumber for a pergola. As he pushed the door open, the hot afternoon air felt heavy, suffocating. He saw a second patrol car pulling up behind the first, another deputy getting out. The scene was spiraling out of his control. He was being treated like a criminal, and he had no idea why. The accusation was so unbelievable, so completely detached from reality, that it felt like a nightmare. But the feel of the sun on his skin and the hard asphalt under his feet told him this was all too real. Daniel swung his legs out of the minivan and stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible and away from his body. The world seemed narrow, the cheerful suburban houses and rustling trees fading into a blurry periphery. His entire focus was on Deputy Riley and the second deputy, a tall, wiry man who stayed back by the patrol car, his hand also resting near his weapon. This was a textbook felony stop, a procedure for dealing with dangerous criminals in stolen vehicles. The sheer disconnect between their tactical posture and the reality of a family man on a weekend errand was staggering. "What the hell is this?" Ben's voice erupted from the van as he pushed his door open. "You can't just do this!" "Ben, stay in the car," Daniel ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. He shot a desperate look at his brother. Ben's face was flushed with anger, his fists clenched. Daniel knew that temper. It was born of fierce loyalty and a hatred of injustice, but right now, it was gasoline next to an open flame. Riley's head snapped toward Ben. "You! Get back in the car now or you'll be charged with obstruction. This is insane. He's done nothing wrong," Ben shouted, taking a step forward. That was all the pretext Riley needed. In a flash, the deputy's demeanor shifted from cold authority to active aggression. He sidestepped Daniel, his focus entirely on Ben. "You want to get involved? Fine." "Officer, wait," Daniel pleaded, stepping between Riley and the minivan, trying to be a shield. "He's just upset. He's my brother. Let me talk to him." It was the wrong move, by placing himself in Riley's path. Daniel had crossed an invisible line. Riley shoved him hard in the chest. "Get back! You do not get between me and my traffic stop!" The shove sent Daniel stumbling backward. He caught his balance, shock warring with a rising tide of anger. "There's no need to put your hands on me," he said, his voice low and firm. "You're interfering," Riley snarled. "That's resisting. You're under arrest." The words were so sudden, so disproportionate to the situation, that Daniel couldn't process them at first. Arrest? For what? For trying to de-escalate? For trying to protect his brother? Before he could even form a response, Riley moved. He grabbed Daniel's arm, twisted it behind his back with a practiced, painful efficiency, and slammed him against the side of the minivan. The metal frame of the vehicle pressed hard against his cheek, the sun-baked paint hot on his skin. He could hear Chloe screaming his name from inside the car, a sound of pure terror that sliced through him. "Stop fighting me," Riley grunted. even though Daniel was doing nothing of the sort. He was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer, violent absurdity of it all. He felt a knee dig into the back of his thigh as Riley forced his other arm back. The cold, unforgiving steel of handcuffs closed around his wrists, the ratchet clicking with a sickening finality. Each click was a punctuation mark in the destruction of his peaceful Saturday afternoon. "My hands are behind my back! You're hurting me!" Daniel gasped, the edge of the door frame digging into his ribs. The second deputy now moved in, his weapon drawn but pointed at the ground, as he ordered a stunned Ben to the ground. Ben, seeing his older brother cuffed and slammed against their family van, sank to his knees, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Through the open window, Daniel could see Chloe. She was holding her phone up, her hand shaking violently. But the lens was steady, pointed directly at the scene. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes held a spark of defiance. She was recording. She was bearing witness. Riley yanked Daniel upright and spun him around. "You have the right to remain silent," he began, the words of the Miranda warning a surreal soundtrack to the nightmare. Daniel barely heard them. His gaze was fixed on his siblings. He saw Ben being handcuffed by the other deputy. He saw Chloe, still filming, her sobs now audible. This wasn't just happening to him. It was happening to them. His failure to de-escalate, his inability to reason with a man who refused to be reasonable, had pulled his family into this vortex of state-sanctioned violence. He was walked to the back of the patrol car, the heat of the asphalt radiating through the soles of his shoes. Riley pushed his head down with a firm hand and shoved him unceremoniously into the back seat. The door slammed shut, the sound like a vault ceiling, through the metal grate. He watched as his family was torn apart on the side of a quiet street. He saw his minivan, their minivan, standing there like a monument to the lie that had started it all. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a suspect. He was a prisoner in a cage of plastic and steel, arrested for the impossible crime of driving his own car. The humiliation was a physical ache, but beneath it, something else was beginning to form, a cold, hard resolve. This was wrong, and he would not let it stand. The interior of the patrol car was an oven. The vinyl seat stuck to the back of Daniel's shirt, and the air was thick with the faint, sterile scent of disinfectant. The handcuffs bit into his wrists, cinched too tightly, a constant, sharp reminder of his powerlessness. Through the rear window, he watched as the second deputy put Ben, also in cuffs, into a separate patrol car. Chloe was being questioned by a third officer who had arrived on the scene, her body language a mixture of terror and defiance. She was still a child in his eyes, a college kid who should be worried about finals, not watching her brothers get arrested, the weight of his responsibility, of his failure to protect them from this, settled on him like a shroud. The drive to the Averton County Pretrial Detention Facility was short and silent. Deputy Riley didn't speak a word, his eyes fixed on the road, a small, tight smile playing on his lips. It was the smile of a man who had won a contest Daniel didn't even know they were playing. For Riley, this wasn't about a stolen car. Daniel saw that with sickening clarity now. It was about compliance. It was about the unquestioning acceptance of his authority. Daniel's calm, logical attempts to reason had been perceived as a challenge, and Ben's outburst had been the excuse to crush that challenge with overwhelming force. The detention center was a monolithic block of concrete and tinted glass, a place designed to intimidate and diminish. The Sally Port doors clanged shut behind the patrol car with an echoing boom, sealing him off from the outside world. He was escorted through a series of sterile corridors, the linoleum floors squeaking under the officers' boots. The air was cold, a stark contrast to the heat of the car, and it smelled of bleach and despair. He was a carpenter. He built things, created order from chaos. This place was the opposite of everything he was. It was a place of deconstruction, of taking men apart piece by piece. The booking process was a masterclass in systematic dehumanization. He was pushed up against a high counter, where a bored-looking sergeant barely glanced up from his computer. Riley announced the charges with a triumphant air. One for felony possession of a stolen vehicle, one for resisting arrest, and one for interference. "And the brother?" the booking sergeant asked, his voice a gravelly monotone. "Obstruction and resisting," Riley said. The process began. Daniel's pockets were emptied, their contents cataloged and placed into a large plastic bag. His wallet, his keys, a stray deck screw, a picture of his parents he always carried. Each item was a small piece of his identity, now confiscated as evidence of his supposed criminality. They took his belt and his shoelaces, standard procedure to prevent self-harm, but it felt like a deliberate act of stripping him of his dignity, making him feel unsteady and incomplete. He was fingerprinted. The black ink cold and smearing as his fingers were rolled across the card by an officer who handled him like a piece of equipment. Then came the mug shot. "Face forward," the officer grunted. The flash was blinding, capturing a single moment of his exhaustion, his fury, his profound bewilderment. He knew that picture, that vacant, stunned expression, would now exist forever in a database, a permanent record of this lie. He was allowed one phone call. His hands trembled as he dialed Chloe's number. He had to be strong for her. "Daniel, oh my God, are you okay?" Her voice was choked with sobs. "I'm fine, Chloe. I'm fine," he lied. "Listen to me. They've arrested Ben, too. I need you to call Aunt Carol. Tell her what happened. She'll know a lawyer. Just be strong. I love you. They have the video. Daniel," she whispered, her voice fierce. "I recorded everything. I won't let them get away with this." A small flicker of hope ignited in his chest. "Good. Good girl. Hold on to that. Don't post it. Don't show it to anyone but the lawyer. Do you understand?" After the call, he was led to a holding cell. It was a small and concrete box with a steel bench and a toilet. The heavy door slid shut with a deafening clang, the lock engaging with a solid thud. He was alone. He sat on the cold bench, the chill seeping through his jeans. The adrenaline from the arrest began to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a vast, echoing emptiness. He replayed the traffic stop in his mind, every word, every gesture. What could he have done differently? Should he have been more submissive? Should he have just gotten out of the car without a word? But that would have meant accepting the lie, admitting to a crime he didn't commit. It would have been a betrayal of who he was. He rested his head against the cold concrete wall. The shock was finally wearing off, crystallizing into something else, something harder and more enduring. It was a single, clear thought that cut through the confusion and the fear. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a violation. An officer of the law, a man who had sworn an oath to protect and serve, had used the power of his badge to terrorize his family and steal his freedom based on a lie. In the cold, quiet solitude of the cell, Daniel Reed made a promise to himself. They had put him in a cage. He would find a way to tear down the whole damn zoo. Daniel had no idea how long he sat in the holding cell. Time became a fluid, meaningless concept, measured only by the changing angles of light through a small, high slit of a window and the muffled sounds of the station outside his door. It was long enough for his initial hot anger to cool into a slow-burning, icy rage. He thought of his brother, Ben, somewhere else in this same cold building, his future now jeopardized by a trumped-up obstruction charge. He thought of Chloe, alone and terrified. forced to make calls no 20-year-old should ever have to make. He was eventually released on bail late that night, the money posted by his Aunt Carol, a formidable woman who arrived at the station with a lawyer in tow. Ben was released shortly after. The reunion in the sterile lobby was quiet and grim. Words felt inadequate. They were bruised, not physically, but in a deeper, more fundamental way. The world felt less safe, less just, than it had that morning. It was on the car ride home that the world began to shift. Chloe's phone, which had been buzzing intermittently, began to vibrate nonstop, a constant, frantic hum. "What is it?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. "It's the video," she said, her eyes wide as she stared at the screen. Someone sent it to a local news blogger. It's everywhere." She turned the phone around, and there it was. His life, his humiliation, packaged for public consumption. The video, clearly shot from a second-story window of one of the houses on Aspen Street, was shaky, but brutally clear. It wasn't Chloe's footage, which was still secured, but a bystander's. It captured everything. Daniel's calm attempts to reason, Ben's angry defense, and the shocking moment Deputy Riley shoved Daniel and slammed him against the van. The audio was clear enough to hear Chloe's screams and the chillingly professional recitation of the Miranda rights over the scene of blatant aggression. By the time they got home, it was no longer just on a local blog. It had been picked up by a national news aggregator. Then another. The clip, titled "Family Terrorized by Averton County Sheriff's Deputy," was being shared on Twitter, on Facebook, on Reddit. It was a digital wildfire, spreading faster than they could possibly comprehend. The comments section was a torrent of outrage. "This is what a police state looks like. He was trying to comply. The cop was looking for a fight. That poor family. I hope they sue him into oblivion." Daniel's name, his face from the brief moment he looked toward the camera before being cuffed, was suddenly public property. His personal nightmare had become a national headline. The phone started ringing. First, local news stations, then national ones. They camped outside his house, satellite trucks parked on the curb where his ordeal had begun just hours before. The sheriff's department, caught completely flat-footed, issued a terse defensive statement. "We are aware of a video circulating online involving one of our deputies. The incident is currently under an internal investigation. We ask the public to reserve judgment until all the facts are known. Deputy Evan Riley has been placed on administrative leave." The statement was like throwing a thimble of water on a forest fire. It only enraged the public more. "Reserve judgment. We saw the video," was the common refrain online. A local activist group announced a protest to be held outside the sheriff's department headquarters the next day. The hashtag Justice for Daniel Reed started trending. Daniel sat at his kitchen table, watching his own life play out on a laptop screen, feeling profoundly disconnected from it. The man on the screen, the one being thrown against the van, felt like a stranger. He was no longer Daniel Reed, carpenter and brother. He was a symbol. He was the unwilling protagonist in a story that was now being told and retold millions of times, each share, each comment, each angry emoji adding to the growing roar. He had wanted justice. He had never wanted this. He had never wanted his family's trauma to be a spectacle. But the choice was no longer his. The digital wildfire had its own momentum, its own insatiable appetite. It had started with a single, unjust spark on a quiet suburban street, and it was now threatening to burn the whole corrupt system to the ground. He could either be consumed by it, or he could learn to wield it. The morning after the video went viral was a surreal assault on the senses. The quiet street outside Daniel's home had been transformed into a media circus. Reporters with microphones and cameras crowded the sidewalk, their voices a low, persistent hum. The protest outside the sheriff's department was the lead story on every local channel. Daniel, Ben, and Chloe were prisoners in their own home. The pergola project forgotten, replaced by a crisis that grew larger with every passing hour. Their aunt's lawyer was a decent man, a specialist in DUIs and minor criminal defense. But it was clear to everyone that he was drowning. He was a rowboat in a hurricane. It was during a hushed, frantic phone call that he uttered the sentence that changed everything. "You don't need a criminal defense attorney anymore. Daniel, you need Marcus Thorne." The name was legendary in legal circles throughout the state and beyond. Marcus Thorne was a civil rights attorney, a man who had spent 3 decades battling police departments, prisons, and city governments. He didn't just take cases. He started crusades. He was known for his sharp suits, his silver tongue, and his absolute refusal to be intimidated. Getting him to take your case was like being struck by lightning. A call was made. An assistant took a message. They didn't expect to hear back for days, if at all. An hour later, Daniel's phone rang. The number was unlisted. "Mr. Reed? This is Marcus Thorne. I've seen the video. I've read the preliminary report, and I am utterly appalled. I'm 10 minutes from your house. Can you meet me?" Thorne's arrival was an event in itself. He was a tall, impeccably dressed black man in his late 50s, his presence radiating an aura of calm, unshakable authority. He didn't just walk. He commanded the space around him. The reporters parted for him like the Red Sea. He strode up to Daniel's front door and shook his hand, his grip firm. "Thank you for seeing me. Daniel, may I come in?" Inside, sitting at the same kitchen table where Daniel had watched his life unravel, Thorne listened. He didn't take notes. He just watched Daniel's face, his eyes full of a deep, focused intensity. Daniel recounted the entire story, from the trip to the hardware store to the cold concrete of the holding cell. Ben and Chloe added their own perspectives, their voices trembling with residual anger and fear. When they were finished, Thorne leaned back in his chair, a grim expression on his face. "First, let me be clear," he began, his voice a rich baritone that filled the room. "What happened to you was not a mistake. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a conscious abuse of power. Deputy Riley was not enforcing the law, he was enforcing his will. The stolen vehicle report, which my office has already looked into, was cleared 3 hours before you were pulled over. A man in another state with a similar license plate had his car stolen and it was recovered. The alert was never properly canceled in the Averton County system. A simple radio check, a moment of due diligence, would have confirmed that. Riley either didn't do it, or he didn't care." The revelation hung in the air, sickening and infuriating. The entire ordeal had been based on outdated information. "This isn't just about Deputy Riley," Thorne continued, his eyes meeting Daniel's. "This is about a department with a culture of impunity, a system that allows a young officer with a fragile ego to believe he is the law. They arrested you and your brother on baseless charges. They terrorized your sister. They chose escalation at every turn when de-escalation was the obvious, humane choice. They are counting on you to be scared, to take a quick settlement, and to disappear. We are not going to do that." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "I want to represent you. Daniel, all of you. We will file a federal lawsuit under Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act. We will sue Deputy Riley for unlawful seizure and excessive force. We will sue Averton County for failure to train and for maintaining a policy of deliberate indifference to the constitutional rights of its citizens. We are not asking for an apology. We are demanding accountability. We are going to put this department on trial." For the first time since the flashing lights had appeared in his rearview mirror, Daniel felt a solid foundation beneath his feet. Thorne wasn't just a lawyer, he was a general. And he was offering to lead them into battle. He saw not just a victim, but a cause. He was an advocate for the damned, a champion for those the system had chewed up and spit out. "Okay," Daniel said, his voice quiet but firm. "What do we do first?" A slow, determined smile spread across Marcus Thorne's face. "First," he said, "we fight back." Daniel's rejection of the settlement, combined with the offensive nature of the offer itself, acted as an accelerant on the already raging fire of public opinion. Marcus Thorne, a master of both the courtroom and the court of public opinion, ensured the story of the nuisance value offer was leaked to a trusted journalist. The resulting headline, "City Tries to Buy Daniel Reed's Silence for $20,000, was explosive. The narrative immediately shifted. This was no longer just about a bad cop having a bad day. It was now a story about a callous and arrogant city government trying to sweep a gross injustice under the rug. The insult galvanized the community in a way the initial video had not. The video elicited shock and anger. The settlement offer exposed a deep, systemic contempt for the very citizens the government was supposed to serve. The protest movements, which had been simmering, boiled over. The daily gatherings outside the sheriff's department grew from dozens to hundreds, and then thousands. People of all ages, races, and backgrounds stood side by side, holding signs with Daniel's face on them. They chanted his name. They demanded not just the firing of Deputy Riley, but a complete overhaul of the department. For Daniel, it was a profoundly strange and disorienting experience. He had become a folk hero against his will. Strangers would approach him at the grocery store, shaking his hand, telling him to stay strong and keep fighting. A GoFundMe started by a neighbor to help with potential legal fees swelled with donations from across the country, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars. The comments were a testament to a shared frustration, a sense that Daniel's story was their story. "This happened to my cousin. I've been treated this way by cops my whole life. Thank you for having the courage to say no." He was uncomfortable with the spotlight. He was a private man, a carpenter who preferred the quiet company of wood and tools. But he also understood the power that had been thrust upon him. His personal fight was no longer personal. It had become a vessel for the hopes and frustrations of thousands of people who felt voiceless and ignored by the system. He began, hesitantly at first, to accept some of the invitations to speak. Guided by Thorne, he appeared at a town hall meeting organized by a local church. Standing before a packed auditorium, he didn't deliver a fiery speech. He just told his story, his voice calm and measured, his words simple and direct. He spoke of his love for his siblings, of his belief in his community, and of the profound disappointment he felt in the institution that was supposed to protect them. "I didn't ask for this fight," he told the silent, captivated crowd. "I was just trying to take my family to the hardware store, but I am in this fight now. And I'm not just fighting for myself and my family anymore. I'm fighting for everyone who has ever been made to feel small and powerless by the very people who are supposed to make them feel safe." His quiet sincerity was more powerful than any political rhetoric. The crowd rose to its feet in a thunderous standing ovation. In that moment, Daniel Reed ceased to be just a plaintiff in a lawsuit. He became the voice of a movement. The city had hoped to silence him with a check. Instead, they had given him a platform and a megaphone. They had wanted to make him a nuisance. The people had made him their leader. The groundswell of support was more than just moral encouragement. It was a strategic weapon. Marcus Thorne knew that juries were composed of ordinary citizens, people who read the news, people who felt the pulse of their community. The louder the people's voice became, the more untenable the city's position grew. They were no longer just fighting Daniel Reed and his lawyer. They were fighting the collective will of Averton County. As the court of public opinion raged, Marcus Thorne and his legal team waged a quieter, more methodical war in the discovery phase of the lawsuit. This was the part of the legal battle fought not with speeches and protests, but with subpoenas, document requests, and a relentless digging for facts. The city, now legally compelled to cooperate, began turning over thousands of pages of documents, a river of bureaucratic paper that Thorne's team was determined to pan for gold, and they found it. The centerpiece of their discovery was Deputy Evan Riley's complete, unredacted personnel file. The city's attorneys had fought to keep it sealed, citing privacy concerns, but a federal judge, swayed by the public nature of the case, had ordered its release. What it contained was not just a smoking gun, but a veritable arsenal. In his 4 short years with the Averton County Sheriff's Department, Evan Riley had accumulated 9 citizen complaints, 9 separate incidents where members of the public had felt so wronged by his conduct that they had taken the official step of filing a report. The details formed a chilling and unmistakable pattern. There was the traffic stop where he allegedly pulled a college student from his car and threw him to the ground for talking back. The domestic dispute call where he was accused of escalating the situation by shouting at both parties instead of mediating. The complaint from an elderly woman who claimed he had illegally searched her car during a stop for a broken taillight. Dumping the contents of her purse on the hood. In every single case, the pattern was the same. A minor infraction or a routine call would be escalated into a hostile confrontation by Riley's aggressive and domineering behavior. He was a hammer who saw every citizen as a nail. More damning than the complaints themselves was the department's response to them. Of the 9 complaints, 7 had been dismissed as unfounded after a cursory internal review. The other 2 were deemed substantiated, but Riley's punishment had been a joke. For the incident with the college student, he received a written reprimand. For the illegal search, he was required to attend a 4-hour online refresher course on Fourth Amendment rights. There was no suspension, no loss of pay, no meaningful consequence. "This is the ball game," Thorne said, slapping the thick file on the conference room table. Daniel, Ben, and Chloe sat across from him, looking at the mountain of paper that represented the secret history of the man who had torn their lives apart. They knew. Thorne continued, his voice low and intense. This wasn't a good cop who made a single mistake. This was a problem officer, a lawsuit waiting to happen, and the department did nothing. They didn't discipline him. They didn't retrain him. They covered for him. They are culpable. Every one of these complaints was a warning sign they chose to ignore. The file also contained Riley's psychological evaluations from his initial hiring. A psychologist had noted his scores on the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, MMPI, showed a rigid personality structure and a potential for authoritarian behavior under stress. The recommendation was for close supervision during his probationary period. There was no evidence any such supervision had ever taken place. The documents painted a portrait not just of a rogue officer, but of a deeply flawed system. It was a culture that protected its own, that valued loyalty over accountability, and that consistently ignored the warning signs of a dangerous employee until it was too late. Riley wasn't an anomaly. He was a product of his environment. He was an officer who had been taught, through the department's inaction, that his badge gave him impunity. He believed he was above the law because his superiors had spent 4 years showing him that he was. "He thought he could get away with what he did to you," Thorne said, looking directly at Daniel. "Because he had gotten away with it 9 times before. This time is different. This time, we have the video. And this time, we're going to make sure a jury sees this entire sordid history." The personnel file was no longer just a stack of papers. It was the story of how the monster was made. A deposition is a trial in miniature, stripped of all ceremony. There is no robed judge, no jury box, just a long conference table in a sterile law office, a court reporter. and a relentless search for the truth. It was here, in this quiet, air-conditioned room, that Deputy Evan Riley's carefully constructed world would be dismantled, piece by painful piece. He walked in flanked by two lawyers from the city, his uniform crisp, his posture ramrod straight. He still carried himself with that same air of absolute certainty he'd had on the side of Aspen Street. He was there to recite his official report, a work of fiction that painted Daniel as non-compliant and Ben as aggressive, a version of events where he was the calm, professional officer forced to take control of a deteriorating situation. He believed in his own story. He believed it would protect him. For the first hour, the city's lead attorney gently guided him through his narrative. Riley spoke in a confident monotone, using police jargon to describe how he secured the scene and dealt with interfering parties. He sounded plausible, authoritative, every bit the competent officer. Daniel and Marcus Thorne listened in silence, letting him build his own gallows. Then, it was Thorne's turn. He began not with a roar, but with a whisper. "Deputy Riley," Thorne said, his voice calm and almost friendly, "you testified that Mr. Reed was immediately uncooperative. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. He questioned my lawful commands," Riley said, sitting up a little straighter. "He questioned the assertion that the van he was driving was stolen? The van for which he provided you with valid registration in his own name?" "He was argumentative, sir." Thorne nodded slowly, as if considering this. "I see. So, in your professional opinion, a citizen calmly pointing out a factual error is being argumentative?" The city attorney objected, but the tone was set. Thorne then had a paralegal set up a large monitor at the end of the table. "I'd like to play an exhibit for the record," he announced. "The body camera footage from Deputy Riley's own uniform." The room went silent as the video began. It was even more damning than the bystanders' footage. The audio was crystal clear. It captured Riley's immediate, aggressive tone. It captured Daniel's polite, reasonable responses. Thorne played the first 30 seconds. "Officer," Thorne said, pausing the video, "you've just arrived. Mr. Reed has complied with your request for documents. He has done nothing aggressive, yet you accuse him of driving a stolen vehicle. Did you, at this point, run a check on the VIN or reconfirm the status of the license plate with your dispatch?" Riley shifted in his chair. "I was acting on the information I had from the initial alert." "The 3-hour-old, outdated alert?" Thorne pressed. "You didn't think to take 10 seconds to verify information before accusing a man of a felony in front of his family?" Thorne continued this way for 4 grueling hours. He played the video in short, devastating segments, forcing Riley to explain his own actions, his own words, his own escalating anger. He made him watch himself shove Daniel. "Please describe for the record, Deputy, what is happening in this clip." Riley stared at the screen, his face pale. "I am using a control technique to create distance. It looks like you're shoving a man who is trying to mediate a situation you created. Is that part of your training? To physically assault a citizen who is trying to keep things calm?" He made him watch the moment he cuffed Daniel, the sound of Chloe's terrified screams filling the conference room. "In this moment, officer, who was the biggest threat on that street? The carpenter whose arms you were wrenching behind his back, or you?" With every clip, every question, Riley's composure cracked. His confident answers became clipped, one-word replies. His body language shifted from rigid defiance to a sullen, defensive crouch. The man who had entered the room a proud officer was being reduced to a petty bully, exposed by the unblinking eye of his own camera. The final question was the kill shot. "Deputy Riley," Thorne said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the entire day. "You had every opportunity to de-escalate. You could have verified the registration. You could have spoken to Mr. Reed with respect. You could have treated a family on a Saturday afternoon like human beings instead of enemy combatants. Why didn't you? Riley stared at the blank monitor, the reflection showing a defeated man. He had no answer. He just shook his head. The deposition was a catastrophe for the city. Their star witness had been obliterated. His testimony was now worthless, a collection of lies and self-serving justifications directly contradicted by incontrovertible video evidence. The lawyers who had walked in with him knew it. They had built their entire defense on his credibility, and Marcus Thorne had just burned it to the ground. The video hadn't just recorded an arrest, it had recorded the complete unraveling of a man and a legal defense. The shockwaves from the disastrous deposition reached the city manager's office before the official transcript was even typed. The city's attorneys, their faces grim, delivered the news in stark, unequivocal terms. The case was unwinnable. Dean Miller's testimony had been so thoroughly destroyed, so completely contradicted by his own body camera, that putting him on a witness stand in front of a jury would be an act of legal suicide. The video alone would likely result in a massive verdict, combined with Miller's history of complaints and his disastrous performance under oath. The potential damages were astronomical. The city was facing a financial catastrophe and a public relations nightmare from which it might not recover. The old strategy, deny, defend, and settle for a pittance, was dead. They needed a new one, and they needed it fast. The city manager, a pragmatic and politically savvy woman named Sarah Caldwell, knew that simply writing a bigger check wouldn't solve the underlying problem. The public was enraged. The trust between the community and the sheriff's department was shattered. Another multi-million-dollar settlement would be seen as hush money, a confirmation of guilt without any real change. It would placate the lawyers, but it wouldn't heal the city. Caldwell called an emergency, closed-door meeting with the mayor and the city council. The conversation was blunt. They were on the verge of a full-blown crisis that could define their careers and bankrupt the city. They needed a solution that was as radical as the problem itself. A week after the deposition, Marcus Thorne received a call not from the city's legal department, but from Sarah Caldwell herself. The request was unusual, a face-to-face meeting with her and the mayor. With Daniel present, no lawyers at first, just the principals. Thorne was suspicious, but intrigued. He and Daniel met the mayor and city manager in a neutral conference room at a downtown hotel. The atmosphere was tense, but Caldwell cut straight to the point. "Mr. Reed, Daniel," she began, her tone direct and devoid of political fluff. "On behalf of the city of Averton, I want to offer my deepest, unqualified apology for what you and your family endured. There is no excuse for the conduct of Deputy Riley or for the systemic failures in our sheriff's department that allowed it to happen." Daniel just nodded, his expression unreadable. He had heard apologies before. They were just words. "We know we have to make this right," Caldwell continued. "And Mr. Thorne has made it clear that a simple financial settlement is not what you're looking for. You're looking for justice. You're looking for change. And frankly, so are we. We cannot survive as a city with this broken relationship between our citizens and law enforcement." She slid a folder across the table. It wasn't a settlement offer. It was a proposal. Last year, the City Council authorized the creation of a Citizens Oversight Commission for the Sheriff's Department. It was meant to be a bridge between the community and law enforcement, a body with the power to review internal affairs investigations, analyze use of force data, and make binding recommendations on policy changes. The sheriff's union fought it, and it has been stuck in bureaucratic limbo ever since. We are prepared to fully fund and empower it, effective immediately. She paused, looking Daniel directly in the eye. The commission will have 7 members. We want you to be one of them. We want you to take your experience, your perspective, and your integrity, and help us fix this from the inside. We're not offering you a check to go away. We're offering you a seat at the table, a position of real power to effect the very changes you've been fighting for. The offer was stunning, completely unprecedented. Daniel was speechless. He had been prepared for a fight, for a trial, for a war of attrition. He had never imagined this. They weren't trying to buy his silence. They were trying to enlist him in the solution. Thorne, ever the strategist, immediately saw the angles. It was a brilliant political move on the city's part, a way to co-opt their most vocal critic and show the public they were serious about reform. But it was also an opportunity, a chance for Daniel to achieve something a lawsuit never could. A verdict could punish the past, but this role could reshape the future. The financial settlement for the damages you suffered would be negotiated separately and fairly, Caldwell added quickly. This is not in lieu of that. This is in addition to it. This is about rebuilding trust. Daniel looked at Thorne, then back at the city manager. For months, he had been an outsider, a victim fighting against a monolithic, hostile system. Now, they were offering him a key to the front door. The choice was his: continue the path of the warrior, or accept the much more complex and uncertain role of the reformer. It was a gamble. But the potential prize was not just his own justice, but justice for the entire community. The decision was not an easy one. Daniel spent days discussing the city's offer with his family and with Marcus Thorne. Ben was skeptical, seeing it as a trap, a way for the city to neutralize him. Chloe, ever the idealist, saw the immense potential for good. Thorne laid out the risks and rewards with clinical precision. It was a high-stakes gamble. If the commission was a sham, Daniel's credibility would be destroyed. But if it was real, it was a shortcut to the very heart of the system he wanted to change. In the end, Daniel's nature as a builder won out. He had spent his life constructing things, fixing what was broken. The sheriff's department was the most broken thing he had ever encountered, and the thought of having the tools to actually repair it was too compelling to refuse. He accepted the position. The announcement sent another shockwave through the city. The lawsuit was settled for a significant, undisclosed sum that allowed Daniel and his family financial security. But the real headline was his appointment to the newly empowered Citizens Oversight Commission. To his supporters, he was a hero walking into the lion's den. To the police union and its allies, he was the fox being put in charge of the hen house. His first commission meeting was a surreal experience. He sat at a large, polished table in a city hall conference room, the same kind of room where his deposition had taken place. But now, he wasn't a witness. He was a commissioner. The other 6 members were a mix of community leaders, academics, and retired law enforcement officials. The new sheriff, a man who had replaced the old one forced into early retirement after the scandal, sat at the end of the table, his face a mask of polite but wary professionalism. Daniel quickly learned that the machine of government moved at a glacial pace. The work was not dramatic confrontations, but a slow, painstaking grind. He spent his days not on construction sites, but in meetings, poring over budget reports, use of force statistics, and dense, jargon-filled policy manuals. He had gone from fighting a single officer to fighting a deeply entrenched bureaucracy. His unique perspective, however, was immediately invaluable. When the commission reviewed a new policy on traffic stops, Daniel was the only one in the room who understood the experience from the other side of the car window. The policy says officers should seek to de-escalate, Daniel pointed out, his voice quiet but firm. That's too vague. What does it mean in practice? It should explicitly state that verifying information through dispatch takes precedence over ordering a citizen out of a vehicle when there is no apparent physical threat. It should mandate that a citizen questioning a perceived error is not, in itself, grounds for a charge of obstruction. He could see the resistance in the eyes of the retired cops on the commission. They saw it as tying the hands of officers, but the civilians, the academics, the community leaders, they listened. They had seen his video. They knew he spoke from a place of hard-won, terrifying experience. He championed a new initiative to overhaul the department's early warning system, the very system that had failed to flag Evan Riley. He argued that the number of citizen complaints, not just the substantiated ones, should be a trigger for automatic review and retraining. The pattern is the most important thing, he argued, week after week. One complaint might be a fluke. 9 complaints is a flashing red light we can no longer afford to ignore. He was making a difference, but it was slow, incremental work. For every step forward, there were 2 steps of bureaucratic resistance, union grievances, and budgetary constraints. He was learning the complex, frustrating, and sometimes rewarding art of changing the system from within. He was no longer just the victim of the machine. He was becoming one of its most important, and unlikely, mechanics. He was learning its language, its weaknesses, its pressure points. The fight was far from over. But the battlefield had changed. He had traded the courtroom for the committee room, and his hammer for a policy manual. For 6 months. Daniel dedicated himself to the commission. He treated it like one of his carpentry projects, measuring the problem, studying the blueprints of the department's policies, and trying to make precise cuts to fix what was broken. He successfully pushed through a revised, more detailed de-escalation policy for traffic stops and got the commission to formally recommend a complete overhaul of the early warning system for problem officers. These felt like significant victories, tangible proof that his decision to join the commission was the right one, but then he ran into the wall. The wall was not a single person or a specific event. It was the vast, invisible, and immensely powerful inertia of the status quo. His recommended policy changes, passed unanimously by the commission, were sent to the sheriff for implementation. The sheriff, a political animal caught between the commission's demands and the fury of his own deputies' union, delayed. He formed a study group to assess the operational impact of the new policies. He cited unspecified budgetary concerns. Weeks turned into months. The policies, Daniel's hard-won victories, were gathering dust on a desk, effectively vetoed by inaction. The police union was the other part of the wall. Its president, a bulldog of a man named Frank Miller, viewed Daniel as a mortal enemy. He publicly decried the commission as an anti-police witch hunt and called Daniel a grandstanding amateur who knows nothing about real police work. The union filed official grievances against the proposed changes, arguing they would endanger officers and violate their collective bargaining agreement. They flooded city council meetings, their members in uniform, creating an intimidating show of force. Daniel experienced the resistance personally. He would walk into meetings with department heads and be met with a thinly veiled hostility. They answered his questions with clipped, evasive answers. Data he requested would be slow-walked, delivered in intentionally confusing formats. He was an outsider, a foreign antibody that the system was trying to reject. The breaking point came during a review of a recent officer-involved shooting. The commission was given a heavily redacted internal affairs report. The names of the officers were blacked out, and key witness statements were missing. Daniel argued that under their mandate, they had the right to the unredacted files. The department's legal counsel flatly refused, citing state laws protecting officer privacy. So, we're an oversight commission that isn't allowed to see what we're supposed to be overseeing? Daniel asked in open frustration during a public meeting. This isn't oversight. It's theater. The realization dawned on him with crushing weight. The commission had no real teeth. It could recommend, it could advise, it could study, but it could not command. Its power was entirely dependent on the goodwill of the very department it was supposed to be policing. And that department, protected by its union and a culture of defensiveness, had no intention of ceding any real control. He felt like a man trying to renovate a house while the owner kept changing the locks. He could see exactly what needed to be done. The foundation was cracked, the wiring was frayed, but he wasn't being given the tools to do the work. His seat at the table was beginning to feel like a high chair. He expressed his frustrations to Marcus Thorne over coffee. I was naive. Marcus, I thought they genuinely wanted change, but they just wanted the appearance of change. They wanted the good PR of putting me on the commission, but they never intended to listen to me. Thorne stirred his coffee, his expression thoughtful. You weren't naive. Daniel, you were hopeful. You gave them a chance to do the right thing. Now you know the truth. You can't fix the machine by being a consultant. The only way to truly change an institution is from the top. The person in charge makes the final call. Everyone else just makes suggestions. The words hung in the air, planting a seed. Daniel had spent months suggesting, recommending, and advising, only to be met with a wall of resistance. He was tired of asking for permission to fix a system that had so profoundly wronged him and his community. Perhaps it was time to stop asking. Daniel's disillusionment with the commission grew into a quiet anger. He continued to attend meetings and fight for every inch of progress. But the futility of his position became clearer with each passing week. The system wasn't designed to be fixed from the outside, or even from the advisory board he sat on. It was designed to protect itself. The catalyst for his next move came, as it often did, from the community. A local news station was doing a one-year anniversary story on his arrest and the subsequent reform efforts. They interviewed him, and he spoke honestly about his frustrations, about the commission's lack of real power, and about the wall of resistance he had faced. The story ended with a town hall meeting where citizens could voice their concerns directly to a panel of city leaders. Daniel was in the audience, not on the panel. He just came to listen. The room was packed. The mood was tense, one by one. Citizens stood up and shared their stories of negative encounters with the sheriff's department, their voices echoing the same frustrations Daniel felt. The sheriff and the city manager offered placating bureaucratic responses about ongoing training and commitment to dialogue. Finally, a woman in the back of the room, a fiery grandmother who had been a regular at the protests, stood up. Her voice cut through the stale air of the auditorium. With all due respect, Sheriff, we're tired of your committees and your empty promises, she said, her finger pointing directly at the stage. We've had a year of talk and nothing has changed. The only person who seems to understand the problem is Daniel Reed. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The woman wasn't finished. She turned and looked directly at Daniel, who was sitting 3 rows in front of her. You know what needs to be done. Daniel, we've seen you try, but they won't listen to you on that commission. There's an election next year. You should run for sheriff yourself. The room fell silent for a beat, a collective intake of breath. Then, a single person started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet, a thunderous, roaring ovation directed not at the stage, but at Daniel. The chant started, low at first, then growing in volume. Run! Dan! Run! Run! Dan! Run! Daniel was stunned, his face flushing. The idea was absurd, preposterous. He was a carpenter, a man who had never held public office, who had no political experience, who had never asked to be a leader. He looked around at the faces in the crowd. Black, white, Hispanic, young, old, all united in this single, impossible idea. He left the town hall in a daze, the chant still ringing in his ears. He drove home, the idea replaying in his mind. Sheriff Reed. It sounded like a joke. But the more he thought about it, the less funny it became. He thought about the wall of resistance. He thought about the union president, the evasive department heads, the policies left to die on the sheriff's desk. Marcus Thorne's words came back to him. The only way to truly change an institution is from the top. He talked it over with Chloe and Ben that night. He expected them to laugh. They didn't. "You should do it," Chloe said, her eyes serious. "You're the only one who can—" Ben, who had been the most cynical, nodded in agreement. "They put you through hell. Dan, it's time to put them through some changes." The decision solidified over the next week. It was audacious. It was a long shot. The incumbent sheriff was a 30-year veteran of the department, backed by the powerful police union and the entire local political establishment. Daniel had no money, no campaign staff, no political machine, but he had something they didn't. He had a story. He had the trust of the people. He had the unassailable moral authority of a man who had been wronged by the very system he now sought to lead. 2 weeks after the town hall, Daniel Reed stood on the steps of the Averton County Courthouse, the same building where he had been processed as a criminal a year before, surrounded by his family, Marcus Thorne, and a crowd of cheering supporters. He stepped up to a podium. "A year ago, I was arrested on this very spot for a crime I didn't commit," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I was told that to get justice, I had to work within the system. I have tried, but I have learned that the system is not broken. It is working exactly as it was designed, to protect itself. It is time for a new design. It is time for a new sheriff. That is why today, I am officially announcing my candidacy for the office of Averton County Sheriff." The crowd erupted. The audacious leap had been taken. The campaign for Averton County Sheriff was a brutal, grueling affair, a political street fight that pitted a grassroots insurgency against a deeply entrenched political machine. The incumbent, Sheriff Mike Thompson, had been in law enforcement his entire adult life and had held the top job for a decade. He was the quintessential old guard cop, backed by a mountain of cash from the police union and local business interests who valued a predictable, pro-establishment leader. Thompson's strategy was to paint Daniel as a dangerous, unqualified radical. His campaign ads, which flooded the local airwaves, were dark and ominous. They called Daniel anti-police and claimed he wanted to defund the department and let criminals run free. They dug into his past, but found nothing. So they twisted his words, taking his calls for accountability and reform and framing them as an attack on every rank-and-file officer. One particularly nasty ad used a grainy photo from Daniel's mugshot, a visual reminder that he had been arrested, conveniently leaving out the fact that he had been exonerated. Daniel had no money for television ads. His campaign was run out of a donated storefront, staffed by volunteers and funded by small-dollar online donations. But he had an army. The same people who had protested for him a year ago now knocked on doors for him. They made phone calls, organized rallies, and spread his message on social media. His campaign wasn't about money, it was about people. His greatest asset was his own authenticity. He was a terrible politician in the traditional sense. He didn't speak in polished sound bites. He spoke from the heart. At community forums and town halls, he wouldn't just give a stump speech. He would listen. He heard the stories of mothers who worried about their sons, of small business owners frustrated by slow police response times, of people who felt their own communities were both over-policed and underprotected. The televised debate was the turning point. Sheriff Thompson came prepared with talking points and attacks. He was polished, professional, and condescending. He called Daniel Mr. Reed, refusing to acknowledge his legitimacy as a candidate. Daniel, in contrast, was calm and direct. When Thompson accused him of being anti-cop, Daniel looked directly into the camera. "I am not anti-police," he said, his voice firm. "I am pro-good police. I am pro-accountability. I believe the badge is a sacred trust, and that when that trust is broken, it must be repaired. My opponent talks about supporting his deputies. I want to support the good deputies by getting rid of the bad ones who tarnish their reputation. I want to lead a department that our children look up to, not one they are afraid of. Sheriff Thompson had a deputy with 9 citizen complaints, and he did nothing. That is not leadership. That is a failure of leadership." He then told his own story, not as a victim, but as a citizen who had seen the system fail firsthand. He spoke not just of his own arrest, but of the policies he had tried to implement on the Oversight Commission and how they had been blocked by the sheriff's inaction. Thompson was rattled. He had come to debate a carpenter. He found himself debating a man who knew his department's failures better than he did. The final weeks of the campaign were a blur of rallies, handshaking, and sleepless nights. The polls, which had initially shown Daniel as a massive underdog, began to tighten. The establishment started to panic. More attack ads came out, but it was too late. The community had made up its mind. They had a choice between more of the same, a leader who defended a broken system, or a chance for real change, a leader who had been forged in the fire of that system's injustice. On election night, Daniel gathered with his family and his small team of volunteers in the storefront campaign headquarters. They watched the results come in on a projector screen, the mood a mixture of hope and nervous exhaustion. The first results, from the wealthy, more conservative suburbs, favored Thompson. But then the numbers from the inner city, from the working-class neighborhoods, from the communities that had felt the sting of injustice most acutely, began to pour in. Daniel's numbers surged. The race was neck and neck. It all came down to the final few precincts. When the local news channel finally called the race, the room exploded. Daniel Reed, the carpenter, the man who had been arrested for driving his own car, had won. He was the next sheriff of Averton County. The day Daniel Reed took the oath of office was cold and clear, the winter sun glinting off the windows of the county courthouse. The crowd gathered on the steps was a mosaic of Averton County, the community activists who had chanted his name, the church leaders who had given him a platform, the families who had shared their stories with him on the campaign trail, and even a handful of sheriff's deputies, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. His own family, Chloe and Ben, stood beside him, their pride a palpable warmth against the chill air. He placed his left hand on a Bible held by his sister and raised his right. He repeated the oath, his voice steady and strong, the words echoing across the silent plaza. When he finished, the chief judge smiled. "Congratulations, Sheriff Reed." The title still felt foreign, a suit of clothes that didn't quite fit. The applause was thunderous. Daniel stepped to the podium, not as a candidate, but as the leader of the very institution that had once tried to break him. He looked out at the sea of faces, his gaze falling on the black and white patrol cars parked at the edge of the square. A year and a half ago, one of those cars had been his cage. Now, they were all his responsibility. "Thank you," he began, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "We are here today not to celebrate a victory, but to begin our work. The work of rebuilding trust, the work of restoring faith, the work of ensuring that what happened to my family on the side of Aspen Street never happens to any family in this county ever again." He didn't make grand promises. He spoke of the specific practical changes he would implement. On his first day, he would sign an executive order immediately implementing the de-escalation and early warning system policies the commission had developed. He would open the books on the department's budget and disciplinary records. He would create a new division of community affairs, staffed by deputies and civilians, to work collaboratively with neighborhood leaders. "To the men and women of the Averton County Sheriff's Department," he said, his voice direct and unwavering, "I am not your enemy. I am your new sheriff. I will support you. I will equip you. And I will have your back when you do your job with integrity and respect. But I will hold you accountable when you do not. The era of protecting bad cops at the expense of good ones is over. The era of prioritizing the ego of an officer over the rights of a citizen is over. Our mission, from this moment forward, is simple: to protect and to serve every citizen, every time." The victory was not an end, but a beginning. The road ahead would be long and difficult. He would face fierce resistance from the Union, from the entrenched bureaucracy, and from those who feared change. But as he stood on those steps, surrounded by the people who had lifted him there, he felt not the weight of the burden, but the strength of the opportunity. He was a builder, and he had just been handed the keys to the biggest, most important renovation project of his life. The man who had been unjustly caged was now in charge of the keepers, and he was about to remodel the entire zoo. The storms of life do not always announce their arrival for Daniel. The tempest began with the mundane quiet of a Saturday drive. Looking back, one must ask what confluence of factors led to that moment. What was burning inside Deputy Evan Riley? It was likely not malice in its purest form, but something far more common and corrosive, a profound insecurity, armored by the absolute power of a badge. Perhaps in his world, respect was not earned but demanded, and any perceived challenge, even the calm, logical reasoning of a man like Daniel, was a threat to his fragile sense of self. He had been trained to see non-compliance as a danger, but his training had failed to teach him the difference between a threat and a citizen with a valid question. His ego needed a victory, and on that sun-drenched street, Daniel Reed's dignity was the price. If Riley had possessed the humility to make a simple phone call, to verify the outdated information, the entire tragedy would have been a non-event, a 2-minute stop ending with a polite apology. If the department had heeded the 9 previous warnings, he never would have been on that street at all. And what of Daniel? If he had been a different man, more volatile or more timid, how might the story have changed? Had he matched Ben's anger, perhaps the justification for the arrest would have appeared to some more plausible. Had he been cowed into immediate, silent submission, he might have avoided the handcuffs that day, but at the cost of his self-respect, tacitly accepting a narrative in which he was the suspect, not the victim. His victory was not born of aggression, but of an unshakable, quiet integrity. His refusal to accept the lie was the moral foundation upon which everything else was built. This story teaches us that true strength isn't about the volume of your voice, but the clarity of your principles. It reminds us that a system is only as strong as the people who have the courage to hold it accountable, even at great personal cost. What does it truly mean to protect and serve? And at what point does challenging an order from authority become not an act of defiance, but an act of profound civic duty? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.